My name is Elizabeth Fries, and I am an outreach coordinator with the Human Services Center. And this webinar is brought to you by the Mon Valley Providers Council's Working Group on Employment and Training. The MVPC is a council of about 70 member agencies that work together to identify and address gaps in services in the Mon Valley region of Allegheny County. And the Employment and Training Group does a lot of work around increasing access to resources for job seekers. So with the COVID-19 pandemic and a transition to a predominantly virtual world, we wanted to provide training on how to navigate the virtual world as a job seeker. So today we will have Ken McCoy from Equus Workforce Solutions, who will present to us on how to be prepared and successful for a virtual job fair. Ken is a member of the Equus Workforce Solutions National Service Delivery Team as Operations Support Director for over 300 locations throughout the United States, specializing in technology and innovation. He has worked with multiple operations on virtual job fairs as the need to provide options for job seekers and businesses to connect in innovative ways has become a priority. Ken has a Bachelor of Science in Management and Organization and is a Society for Human Resource Management Senior Certified Professional. So with that, I will have Ken take it away.
Great. Thanks, Elizabeth, and welcome everybody to the webinar today to talk about what is a virtual job fair. I'm going to here take myself off a camera to save some bandwidth. One of the challenges in our virtual world is the world of the internet is not unlimited, and sometimes we run into some issues with that. So I'm going to stop my video and start sharing my screen. And we're going to go through a variety of topics regarding virtual job fairs, and hopefully everyone can now see that screen okay.
Yes, we can see that.
Great, thank you. All right, perfect. So yeah, so we're going to talk through what is exactly a virtual job fair. We're going to talk through a couple of different types, and we're going to talk through a variety of tips to not only get ready for a virtual job fair, but how to actually attend it, and then what are kind of the next steps. And then I have a couple of examples of live events that we're going to take a look at so you can see exactly what they look like in real time. So as we go through this, obviously there'll be some questions. We'll gather those up at the end. And without any further ado, we're going to talk through what is a virtual job fair. So the key topics we're going to cover today is exactly what is a virtual job fair, how to get ready for an event, some tips for success, and then what's next. And I think the interesting thing about virtual job fairs are that if you've attended a traditional physical event where it's held at a at a community location or a center where you have employers that show up in person and you go through and talk to a variety of individuals, in a lot of ways it's very similar to how you get ready for an event like that. There are obviously some key differences when you're dealing with a remote situation, but some of the things that we'll talk about are very, very similar. So what exactly is a virtual job fair? A virtual job fair is some type of event that's going to be held on an online platform via, oftentimes organizations will either have a program or an application that they have subscribed to that provides the actual event, or it may be so very, very fancy in terms of it may have some animation, it may have video capabilities, there may be a text feature, things like that. Or it could be very, very simple in terms of just go to a website has links to a varying employer's own job boards or application pages. So there's a really wide range of types of virtual job fairs. What you see on your screen here are two examples that we're going to take a little deeper look at a little bit later in the presentation that are examples of two different ways that job fairs are actually executed. But they can range anything from a very organized professional looking application set up like these to a simple link to a website with links to different job boards or applications for employers. Here's a couple of other things around virtual job fairs. Most job fair virtual events are going to require you to do a registration. And oftentimes, unlike a typical or old style physical event, they're usually going to have this done in advance. Oftentimes it can be up to even 30 days, depending on when the event's scheduled and how significant it is. So the registration piece can be everything as you see the one on the right. Is pretty basic. You're going to have an email address. It's going to ask for your first and last name. It's going to ask, in this case, the country of residence that would be most likely for, to make sure you're getting the right language. And it's going to ask you for a password, because what happens with most of the events is they'll allow you to create a profile. And that profile may have additional information that it will ask for, and most often an opportunity to upload your resume. So you'll be able to create this profile and actually go back to it and update it prior to the event. The one on the left has asking for a little bit more information, so they can be different depending on what they're looking for. In some cases, a virtual job fair registration will ask for information that you almost feels like you're doing a basic job application. Some of the events actually use this information for their employers to be able to go back and look at, okay, here's a registrant that has put information that they have a certain type of experience or certain type of education or other background. They will use that afterwards to be able to reach back out to the candidates. So it's definitely to your advantage to fill out these registration forms in as much detail as you can. And also for a resume, if you have one to be able to upload, you'll want to make it up. You want to make sure it's updated and uploaded, because that's an important piece later on. Job fairs, then, once you have the actual site, can be set up a couple of different ways. The one on the left is set up in what they have called virtual booths, which are exactly what they sound like. They're a animated or static looking image of a booth that you would actually go to and enter, then get further information about that company and what job positions they have available. The best sites also do a good job of having information about that company. So not just the company name and what positions they have, but maybe some information about what they're like to work for. In some cases, they may have a video that talks a little bit about that company and what it's like to be an employee there. And then the one on the right-hand side is a little bit more focused around chat. That particular site was more about having various chat rooms to have information sessions about the type of work and the type of positions they have available. And again, I mentioned earlier, the virtual job fair could have a variety of different capabilities in terms of how you interact with it. So it could be very basic, to where all you're doing is clicking a link and making a connection with a job on their particular application or website, all the way to having a video interview on the spot capability. So you could have anything in between, depending on the type of site they're using. And this gives you a little bit closer look on that particular site, how they have a variety of chat rooms set up, and as far as to have discussions with representatives of this particular organization. And the one we'll look at live here in a little bit has a similar type of a setup. So again, not all sites are going to have that chat room feature, but most of them, that seems to be a very common feature for most of these sites. And in this case, this particular event that was going on yesterday was very specific around the chat feature. It did not have specific links to individual jobs that they really tried to push you to their website for that. Then to contrast that with the other event, the other location, they have what looks like up here, as I mentioned, kind of a virtual booth. And this is a test site that we're looking at, so it's not customized as it ordinarily would be. But in a normal event, there'd be some signage around there to let you know that that's exactly the site you're looking into. And as again, we'll dig deeper into this particular one in a little bit to show you how the navigation works. But this will take you, there will be links that would take you to their company information, what jobs they have available, things like that. And again, thinking about the registration piece that you did prior to this attending this event, that information is going to be accessible to employers after the fact. So that's an important thing to note, which really distinguishes a virtual job fair to a old-fashioned or older style physical event where you walk around with printed copies of your resumes, and hopefully you get a chance to talk to someone and maybe leave a copy. Here, employers have that ability to go back later and review attendees to the event, and that's a real big plus. So as we touched on, for a virtual job fair, pre-registration is typically going to be required. And as part of that, you need to have an email address. Now, that sounds like a basic concept, but that's something that you're going to need because, number one, that's typically how these events use, they make that your login name is going to be your email address, but also they're going to utilize that later to communicate with you, and that's an important piece. Now, just as we go through some of these things, I'm going to give you a couple little tips too on email addresses. Email address says a lot about you as an individual. So you definitely want to make sure, if you don't have one already, make sure you've got a nice professional sounding email address. Something that sounds along the lines of, I like fuzzy kitties 25 at gmail.com doesn't usually inspire a lot of confidence in a recruiter. So it's important to have a very professional sounding email, because you have to remember in a virtual setting, much like any type of job application you're doing, you're not necessarily going to get an opportunity to speak face to face to someone. So they're judging you by the information they have at hand, and your email address usually is a first step in that judgment. So very important to have a good professional email address. We mentioned you may be able to upload a resume to your profile, so it's important to have an updated resume. We'll talk a little bit more about some tips around how to make sure your resume is not telling too much about yourself that you don't want them to know. So we'll talk a little bit about that, but you want to have a resume available. Having it in a PDF format is the best way to do that and most of these systems will accept that. I also touched on too, your registration information may ask for some work history. They may be utilizing the registration feature as a very basic job application. So be prepared to do that. One trick that sometimes people get caught out on when they're registering for a virtual job fair is sometimes, depending on how significant that registration information is, you may or may not be able to save what you're doing. So what I mean by that is, once you get started doing that registration, make sure you're in a position where you can finish it. That's an important piece, because you don't want to get halfway through it, then realize you can't finish, try to come back and have to redo everything. So that's something to be prepared for. The event may send you out reminders. That's one of the nice things about a virtual event. The challenges to holding events like this in a virtual world is it's very easy for individuals to sign up, but it's also very easy for people not to come. So the events typically will send out reminders that the event is coming. That's, again, another key reason why the email address is so important. So be on the lookout for that, and make sure you make note of it, because one of the challenges too in this world that we get is we're being inundated with so much information. You may sign up for an event 2 or 3 weeks out ahead of time and then forget when the actual event is coming. So make sure you note when that is, and it's possible you may get a reminder. We talked a little bit about chat rooms or video interviews may be included. That's not necessarily a given for a virtual event. It seems to be that a chat or text tape feature is a pretty common thing now for most virtual job fair events, but that's not necessarily always the case. And video is a little less common, because that's a very expensive feature to include on a virtual event platform. So, but you do want to be prepared either way. So when you're dealing with a chat room situation, you have to remember that, again, much like your email address or your resume, you're being assessed as a potential candidate by whoever you're chatting with. So make sure you're not chatting with them as if you were texting your friends. You have to make sure that you're being very professional in how you write and ask questions, because that's part of the criteria that people or candidates or recruiters are doing to size you up, whether they're interested in you for future opportunities. So being professional, those communications are very, very important. Same thing around the video interview piece. You want to make sure that you're dressed, regardless of whether you know a video is happening or not, you want to be dressed as if you were going to be speaking to someone um, in person. The events, the other difference around a virtual job fair, which is very great for employers, is an event could be as much as a few hours. Again, if you're used to a specific type or an old, the old kind of traditional job fair where it happens, from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. on a Wednesday, this could be an all-day thing. It could start at 8 a.m. in the morning and last till 8 p.m. in the evening. One of the great things about a virtual event is it does not lock people into having to actually go to a physical location. And these were starting to get some real interest prior to everything that's kind of gone on with the pandemic, as as there was a need to try to reach out to job seekers in non-traditional ways. Everyone can't always get to a physical location. And with the advent or the influx of smart devices, iPads, iPhones, Androids, things like that, you don't have to go somewhere physically to actually go see something. So having a virtual event like this allows for a broader reach and a longer period. So sometimes an event can be typical size. Most of them tend to be 10 to 4, but I've seen them last for 2 or 3 days. They're available. So that's one of the nice things about a virtual job fair. But you want to make sure you're aware of when you're looking for one or you're registering for one, you know exactly how long it's lasting. And the great thing about virtual job fairs is most of them can be accessed from any device that connects to the internet. So if you have a tablet, you have a smartphone, you have it doesn't really matter where you are at. As long as you can get to the internet with some type of device, you can access a virtual job fair. But again, the key thing is you do need to have the internet, because they are going to be that you have to have that access to them that way. So, but that's one thing that's great. So, if one thing I've always recommended to individuals, you don't have to necessarily do this on your own. If you have someone that you're working with that's helping you in your job search, you can certainly have them with you as a support person, or in this case, in our remote world, you can do it from the safety of your home or other location. So those are some of the kind of tidbits about what a job fair is, a virtual job fair. And again, we're going to look at some more details here towards the end as far as looking at some actual sites. But getting ready for a job fair, a virtual job fair, is really no different than a physical event. And one of the things that candidates or recruiters, are really looking for candidates is what level of preparedness do you have when you're talking to them, when you're interested in what they do. What kind of research have you done? Do you know anything about their company? Are you and that's a real important thing. So depending on the event you're looking at, they tend to be categorized in 3 different ways. You've got either a single employer event, which is one of the examples we'll have here in a little bit, but you also may have an industry-wide. So there may be a healthcare virtual fair, or a manufacturing virtual fair, or something specific around an industry, or it could be just wide open to a whole list of employers. So the nice thing about virtual events is they typically will tell you what the list of participating employers are. So really, really important before you attend the event that you take a look at that list of employers and do just a little quick viewpoint of make sure that there are ones that you're interested in being a part of. Because much like a physical event, once you get into it, you could spend a lot of time just going from employer to employer to employer, trying to figure out whether there's something they have that's an interest of you, or they're an employer that you're even interested in. And you want to be able to focus your energy on those key employers that you are really have an interest in, and you can really focus your attention, because it can really get overwhelming when you get into the actual event, whether that's physical or virtual. So make sure you take a look and review that list of employers. And if there are a few that you're really, really interested in, do a little bit of basic research so that if you do happen to get into a chat session or some type of a virtual interaction, you want to at least say, hey, I know a little bit about you. That tells the recruiter that you are serious about their company and not just fishing around for anything they might have. That's a real big point. We talked a little bit about resume. Make sure you update your resume, and a couple of tips around doing that. Number one, we already touched on the email, making sure that you have a professional email. That's it's a first step that people look at to judge what they're looking at as far as a candidate. You also want to make sure you remove specific information around your location. That's kind of a new thing lately that people, because we're dealing in this remote world, in this virtual world, that oftentimes it may or may not matter where you live, based on where the position is. But if you put that information in there, sometimes recruiters will make a judgment or assessment thinking, oh, that person lives too far away, they're not going to be able to come do this job. So it's always a good practice to remove any type of location-specific information. The only time that would really be a change is if there's specific guidance in the particular job that says you have to live in a certain area to be considered, but that's fairly unusual. That's fairly rare anymore. So anything you can remove in terms of that identifies where you are located is very helpful. And then along those same lines, make sure that you are removing anything that can give away any hints to your age. So when you're talking about your experience level, depending on how much experience you have, you really only need to go back 10 or 15 years of experience, and you do not necessarily, anything beyond that, unless it's particularly relevant to what you're talking about or what the position you're looking for, you don't need to include that. And certainly if that is the case, it gets back too far, leave those dates off. Because that's going to be anything that people are going to do to try to make a judgment based on your age. Now, I know some of you may be thinking, well, you're not supposed to make decisions based on age. That's discrimination, right? Well, you are correct. However, it's only discrimination is if they specifically make a decision, oh, I'm not going to hire you based on age, and they document that somewhere. They're most likely not going to do that. They just aren't going to look at your resume and go further in the process. So very important to take these little tidbits to update your resume to make sure you can be considered. Also check into simple things too. Make sure spelling and other errors, you don't want to get knocked out because you had a misspelling. Where you access the event is also important because you need to make sure you've got a good area that is free of distractions and has good internet coverage and things like that, because you're going to, you want to allow for enough time to be able to attend the event and be able to focus your attention on what you're doing. So for example, test how you will access the event. So when you get to wherever you're at, does your internet, if there's something specific you have to do to get to the internet, make sure you know how to do that. Give yourself a little extra time to make sure it works. You also want to plan, as we talked about, plan your time for the event. Allow enough time to be able to peruse. Now, the nice thing about a virtual event is you can kind of come and go. So if you have a situation to where you can't, allow, like maybe be there right when it starts, and that's another nice thing about a virtual event. You don't have to necessarily be the first one in the door. It doesn't have the same kind of impact as a physical event. So you may have a situation where you were able to log into the event and check it out sort of first thing, kind of get a feel for what's going on, then come back later to spend more time. That's certainly something you can do, and that's not going to have a negative impact. But you may want to tie that around specific chat room time. So again, some of these events are very specific around a chat room that has a particular topic that you're interested in. So you want to make sure you are ready for those particular times. And some of these events, what's nice about them is, and you'll see in the one we'll look at here in a minute, has a way to add the particular chat time to your calendar, so it will remind you that chat room is available and open. So a couple of other tips for success that we've kind of touched on, make sure you allow enough time for the event. Give yourself time, even though it sounds like it might be, an all-day thing. You want to make sure you have enough plenty of time to be able to devote to looking through and reviewing the opportunities that are in the event. Try to reduce the distractions that you have while you're attending. It's, again, because it's a virtual situation, you're operating under remote conditions. It's real tempting to have to do it in your home or other situation. Make sure that you give yourself some room and some time to be able to focus on what you're doing. Dress appropriately. So regardless of whether the event has a video component or any type of face-to-face situation that you're aware of, it's really important to dress in an appropriate fashion. And that doesn't necessarily mean you got to put on a suit and a tie, but something that's, that you would feel good about it from a professional standpoint. So even just, if nothing else, a collared shirt or a button-down type shirt, or a nice blouse dress type conversation or whatever, so that you feel good about yourself as you're interacting with these recruiters, because that makes a big difference. How you're prepared to be when you're speaking to people or having chats or whatever is very, very important, and is going to come through as you interact. I mentioned earlier too, when you decide to get to the event and when you log in, first thing to do is to navigate around and tour the site. You do not necessarily have to go start plowing through each opportunity or employer right when you walk in. And that holds true for a physical event too. It's really important to just kind of review, see what's going on, get the lay of how it works, and try to work out some of those issues, but also give you a feel for what's happening in those areas, and give you a sense of, okay, this is, maybe map out how you want to attack it in more detail afterwards. So take your time, look through the site, make sure you can see, you kind of get a feel for what you're looking for, because there may be opportunities or other things that you weren't expecting that may catch your attention. And I touched on this earlier, but I can't emphasize this enough. Be very, very professional with your chat and texting. Again, recruiters are evaluating you on everything that you do, and in a virtual setting they don't have a lot of opportunities, particularly if there's no face-to-face type interaction. So the only way they're going to get to know or get a feel for how you are as a professional is how you're interacting with them in these chat or text sessions. And it's very tempting to shortcut like you would on a text or something like that. So be very mindful of how you do that that interaction, because that's all they really have in order to evaluate you. And that actually holds true also for any type of contact they have with you later, which we'll touch on. And we touched on this earlier too, but I want to reemphasize this. Make sure you target specific employers and jobs that you are qualified for and have interest in. That's important, because one thing that recruiters are faced with all the time is just a massive pile of resumes and applications that come in for most any job they have posted. And oftentimes these candidates are not anywhere close to being qualified for the roles. They just are, people are applying to positions just because they want to get their name out there. And a virtual event can be tempting to do that as well. The issue with that ultimately is, if I'm a recruiter and I see a candidate submits an application or a resume for a position, and they're not, they're not even close to being qualified, my question is, well, you didn't even really read the description or qualifications, and that right there is going to make me not, it's going to give me a sour taste in my mouth about you as a candidate. So that's really, really important, to make sure that you are applying and sending information and having conversations with those employers that you are qualified and you have an interest in. So what happens next after you attend the virtual job fair? Be ready for an email contact. That's something that's very likely. One thing that we've done, not only as I've worked with job seekers on how to attend job fairs, I also spent a lot of time working with employers so they can be very effective in actually attending a job fair from the employer perspective. And one of the great things about a virtual event compared to a physical one is it's a lot easier for an employer to reach out back to you and say, hey, thanks for coming to the event, really appreciate it. Because one of the things that most of these events can do is they know whether you stopped by their booth or particular location. I know one of the sites that we're going to look at here has that capability. The site has reporting and statistics that know if you you popped into their booth and looked around. So that gives the employer an opportunity to reach back out to you and say, hey, thanks for stopping by. And that's important to make sure that you're responding. By the same context, if you have an employer that you have a conversation, you get some type of a connection with, either through a chat or you submit to them a resume or something specific, an action that you do during the event, it's great to get some information and reach back out to them as well. Just say, hey, just wanted to thank you for having, participating in this virtual event. Just a reminder, I'm interested in this position, and have a connection with them that way. That's a big important thing. One thing that people typically are not aware of is when you go to an actual virtual event, even though you're submitting some information ahead of time, you're submitting a resume, you're giving them some profile information, things like that, you're still very likely going to have to complete their online application. So often the employer will have a link to that, and we'll see an example of that here in a second. But they're going to drive you still to their company website or to do an application. So don't forget that step. Just because you have attended the virtual meeting and expressed some type of interest in the employer, that you're done. You have to make sure that if there is a position you have interest in, make sure you do the online application. And that's not something you have to do right on the spot as you're doing the event, but make sure you go do that very shortly thereafter, because that's what the employer is going to be looking for. And then you can actually utilize that as a contact opportunity. You can follow up and say, hey, I was glad to see you at this virtual job fair. I want to let you know that I completed my online application, that sort of thing. It gives you an opening to have a contact with them. And again, follow up with any connections. That's very, very important. And we really stress to employers that put on these events that you make sure you make a connection with the job seekers, because oftentimes, I know one of some of the feedback that we've gotten for physical events is they feel like while they met a lot of employers and maybe had some conversations, there wasn't any type of a connection. Whereas in this case, there's a great opportunity for that, because of you've already got that information to reach back out with an email or something like that. So if you do get a connection with an employer, make sure you respond back to them. That's very, very important. Even if you're not interested, I think that's an important thing to note. If an employer takes the time and trouble to reach out to you, and it's something that you're truly, after you're thinking about it or whatever, you're not interested, please respond back with them saying, hey, I really appreciate the connection, but I'm just not interested in that particular position. So very, very important on that. So with this, I'm going to switch over and show a couple of events that we've got. There's actually a live event and a demo site that we're going to take a quick peek at to show you what these really look like in real life. So let me flip over to my other screen, and if someone can let me know if they see the Career Eco Wells Fargo Women in Technology Virtual Career Fair. If we can let
Yes,
me
we
know.
can see that. Would you want to take some time to answer some of the questions in the
Oh,
chat
sure.
before we get to that?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm happy to do that.
All right. So we have, if you don't have your work history when registering, will you be able to complete the registration?
It's hard to say. They typically don't make those fields as required. So it just kind of depends on the event. Most that I have seen have have not made that required. So you should still be able to complete your registration.
Great, thank you. And then we've got, how often should we update our resume?
That's a great question. Really, you should update it anytime if you add a new skill or some new type of experience that you want to highlight. I think that's very important. Obviously, if you have if you take a new job or a new position with your company, that's when you want to update it. Otherwise, I think it's okay to maybe just look at it once every maybe 3 to 6 months is enough if you don't have a lot of change. But that's something you do want to take a look at it every now and then. But if you have a new skill or new experience you want to highlight, that's always a great time to do it.
All right. And then how early should we arrive in a virtual job event to be prepared?
Typically, the event will not be live until they actually say it's ready to go. So, for example, in the case of the one we're looking at on the screen right now, it was live at 10 a.m. So I could see this particular screen before that, but I couldn't get into the event or the chat now or any of those sessions. So you can oftentimes sort of get to the landing page like we have here ahead of time, but you won't be able to get in. But that should give you plenty. You should have plenty of time. And then, of course, you've got all from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. to actually attend the event. So you don't have to get there too early. Just making sure your connections are fine.
And then the last question, is it a good idea to wear headphones when attending a virtual job fair?
That's a great question and a great observation. Yes, I definitely would agree that that's a good thing to do because it can be a challenge sometimes to hear when you're not using headphones with using just a laptop microphone or a web camera microphone. They're not always the best. I recommend, using some type of headphones. And just so you know, I've been told, hopefully it's working well today, but I've been told that my headphones sound very, very good. These are $10 headphones I think I got from Target. So you don't have to spend a lot of money to have a good sounding set of headphones. And oftentimes people use their ear pods that they come with their mobile phones or other devices work just fine. So yes, I highly recommend using a headset or headphones while you're attending. Great questions.
Thank you. We can go ahead and move on.
Okay, so this is an example of a web fair. In fact, this is, if you are happening to be making any notes, this particular careereco.com is a virtual job fair application that works for a lot of different companies and organizations. So they have a large listing across the country. So, well, I don't know that there's anything specific to the Pennsylvania area right now, but there could be in the future. But this is an example of a application that provides services for a variety of events. So this particular event is happening right now as we speak, and if you notice we have a landing page, and there's some basic things around it to note. So we've got the time obviously from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. I have already registered for this event, so it's going to let me right in, so we won't have to go through all that. But I will give you an example of what the profile looks like. So if I click on this particular button, and hopefully it will move fairly quickly. This gives you an example of the different things that I could add to my profile. So this one's pretty significant. It has an opportunity. I did not upload a resume because I'm just using it for a test, but it has various things as far as where I'm located and things like that. And again, none of that was required, so I don't have to put in the location if I don't want to. And there's even more information as far as I can add education, I can upload a resume. If, depending on what was going on, I could upload a portfolio sample. So this one's pretty significant in terms of the information it's asking for. The one we'll see here after this is not that significant. So I will back up and go to my event list. So now this particular event has a few different details. So if I click on event details, I come to a main page of the particular what's happening with the event. And this is just detailing a lot of information about Wells Fargo, which is very nice. Good to have some information there. This is a little bit different in terms of ones I've seen. This actually has the job postings they're looking for. And there's 12 jobs that they have available. And if I click on one that maybe I was interested in, so if I click on the details, it takes me to basically a description of the job. And you'll notice this is on the how to apply down here at the bottom, it's directing me to their career page. So this is a good example of while I'm providing Wells Fargo with information about me and potentially a resume and some other information, which again is very important. If I want to apply for this job, I still have to go to their website to do so. So that's important to know. This also has this one has a couple of different chat opportunities. So essentially they're doing it in the form of a basically open sessions that people can have discussions with Wells Fargo staff at that time. So that's always a good example there. And you have to remember, typically when you're in a chat situation like this, you're in a group setting. So you're not necessarily getting a one-on-one conversation with an individual. The last thing on this particular site has specific information around their website. So this is a good example of a site that has it's really focused around chat. That seems to be their real focus for this particular site. Now I'm going to flip over to another site that I'm familiar with. This is one that looks a little bit more. It's got a little more bells and whistles, and it gives you a little bit more visual in terms of so it gives you this kind of pretend-looking exposition center, and all this stuff's customizable. So depending on who's putting on the event, you'll see different signage and things like that. This is their demo site, so it's going to look a little generic. But a lot of these are very similar. So I've got a couple of different ways. So if I want to register, I would click on this particular button here, and it's going to pull me into their account situation. This is where I would fill in information. Now, again, as was asked by one of the questions earlier, there's some basic registration information it's going to ask me for, and depending on the event, there may be additional information after I put in the basics that it looks for. So depending on what they want, but this one's pretty basic. Again, I've been a part of events where we asked for quite a bit of job specific or experience specific information because we wanted to be able to leverage that later for the employers. So if I go back to, most of them have a navigation method on the side. The chat room for this particular thing would pop up over here, but I have to be logged in this case to be able to see it. So their chat sessions, and this particular product has a couple of different ways. They can have open chat rooms that are more of a group session that multiple people can be a part of, or they can actually schedule a one-on-one chat with someone to have a more personal conversation. So you have to be kind of prepared for that. So in this particular one, they're utilizing what's called virtual booths. So they have this organized in what they call a pavilion, and there's only one, so we don't have multiple ones. If there were multiple locations to go to, that would be in this location here. But here is where they have the different vendors that would be participating. And again, being a test site, they don't have everything, so there might be a logo. So if I click into here, this particular virtual booth, now I'm looking at the image what we looked at earlier. That's looks kind of a high-tech looking area that we would come into. And below here is where you're going to get into the specifics in terms of the particular information for this company. So in here, we've got a company profile section that would have information about the company, any various links to their any other information they want you to know. There's also going to be a link to particular job opportunities. So if I go back and look for something that has what in this case, they call offers. Again, another good example of what it looks like. So now we have, and here's where they would have the different job opportunities that you would have that we would be looking for. If you have a video about the company, they would put it here. There's actually a download section if there's different information, such as maybe there's a flyer about potential benefit packages or even an online application flyer. You'd also have a mailbox where you can actually send a direct message to that particular company. Then I just navigate back to home. In some cases, there will be webcasts available as well. This particular vendor has the opportunity for doing a webcast using videos as well. So they don't have, again, the one-on-one video capability as some operations might, but they do have that also. So that's a look at a couple of different types of virtual job fairs. Is this Elizabeth, we want to stop a second here. Do we have any specific questions on how these two events look and any other things I can show people?
Yeah, we can go ahead and open it up to Q&A. Thank you so much, Ken. That was a lot of helpful information. So for For the Q&A, we'll have you guys raise your hand if you would like to speak and unmute yourself and ask your question. So you'll go to the participant button on the bottom, and once you click into that, you should have an option to raise hand, and that's how we will get to questions. So you are welcome to do that if you'd like to ask your question out loud. If you prefer to put your question into the chat, you're welcome to do it that way as well. And then for people on the phone, if you have any questions, you can just go ahead and ask those, since you won't be able to have the raise hand function.
So what are the differences between the virtual fairs and the person job fairs?
Oh, when you say like a physical one that you would go to, kind of the old traditional style?
Yeah, like what's the like what are the main differences?
Well, probably the biggest difference is the physical event. You're going to get there, and you know it tends to be loud. You know, there's lots of it. You're milling about with a lot of other individuals. Oftentimes, you only get a quick introduction to someone who might be at the event. From an employer perspective, they can usually only dedicate maybe one or two people to be there during the whole time. So it can be a little rushed. And that's what I've seen, or I've gotten feedback from attendees, that you go there, you've got your resumes or whatever in hand, you maybe get a quick little 2-minute, 5-minute conversation with an individual, and then there's no real connection per se. Whereas where you do a virtual event, you as a job seeker, you have that opportunity to take your time, look through the event, look through the different employers at your own pace. Don't feel like you're rushed. It's not loud and noisy and distracting. And you have that opportunity to make a connection, even albeit virtually, with the company in a less, it seemed like, rush situation. So I think that's one of the biggest, I guess the other disadvantage of, or if you were going to make a distinction between the other big distinction, is a physical event, you're getting a face-to-face conversation. They're getting to see you in person, and you're having that, one-on-one connection from a verbal perspective. And oftentimes that's really helpful. That would probably be the biggest difference there.
All right, and we do have some questions from the registration process, so I will go ahead and ask those. So this one is, how is the virtual job fair platform set up so each attendee can speak with the rep of their choice? Are there breakout sessions? What if the participant wants to speak with 3 or more companies? Can they get into the 3 different queues at the same time? And can they send their resume, which I think you kind of touched on that part. But.
Yes, and actually, I think the answer to that, all of those, is yes. It really depends on the platform, number one. But oftentimes, I know in this particular platform that we're showing right here, there are specific, each employer virtual booth has chat rooms that they have specific to their employers, and can have up to 10 staff members be a part of those rooms. So getting a chance to speak to somebody one-on-one with an employer is pretty likely if the particular job fair has that option. So that's usually not a problem. Doing it, if they've got various chat rooms going on, doing 3 chat rooms that simultaneously may or may not be possible, although you can jump in and out of various ones. So you wouldn't be locked into one particular one if you decided to participate in it. So you should be able to get into any one that you want. So that's the great thing about most of these events. They're not limited as far as size or volume or quantities or things like that. If you can jump around to different rooms and want to talk to a variety of people, there's most likely going to be able to do that. Some of the employers do have they want you to set up a time. So you may have to make an appointment, and they may do that when you enter the session. They may say, okay, I want to have a 15-minute conversation with you at a certain time. They may require that. but most of them are open and they let you just jump in. Then you mentioned the resume. Yeah, there's some of the events, like for example, this one that's up on the screen right now, when you go into the virtual booth and you decide that there's a job opportunity that you're interested in, you actually will hit a button that will send your profile and your resume if you uploaded it directly to that employer via the platform. Now, that doesn't necessarily keep you from having to go online to ultimately apply using their normal system, but you can, in some cases, send a resume or your interest directly to them.
All right, thank you. And then we have another question in the chat. How do employers become part of a virtual job fair?
Well, that's usually the organizers of the event, much like a traditional physical event, are going out and getting employers to get engaged with it. So depending on the scenario, sometimes employers come to the organizers and say, hey, I need to have a job fair, and that's how it gets started. Or the organizer says, hey, we're going to put on this job fair event. Do you want to be a part of it? So it's a variety of ways that they can get involved. Right now, because again of the scenarios that we're running into, especially in those situations where you are not allowed to have large numbers of individuals in any type of a group setting, these have become very, very popular with employers. They want any way they can to get out in front of potential job seekers, so they're very, very interested in becoming parts of virtual job fairs. So there's a variety of ways that happens, and oftentimes it's driven by groups that organize these events reaching out to employers and inviting them to be a part of it.
All right, great, thank you. Are there any other questions at this time?
So why is it so important that you need to get everything you need ready before you head into the virtual fair, especially how it's always important to make sure that you get what you needed?
Well, I think it's just more of a matter of just in any type of situation, being prepared and organized is going to make your experience a lot less stressful. So if you've got your information together, you've got your resume updated, you've got a setting where you can be concentrate on what you're doing, just like any type of situation, that comes across when you're actually interacting with individuals, and it makes the experience a lot more. Again, you can focus on presenting yourself, focus on getting the information you need from the employers. It just more of an organizational skill that applies not only for a physical event, but for a virtual event as well. Because the other thing about thinking about how virtual events go, because there's such a move from employers to have their workers work in remote settings or virtual, how they interact and how they work in a virtual job fair is an indicator of how they might be as an employee. So it's all about, again, being prepared, being ready to go, so that when you have that interaction or you have that opportunity to interact with somebody, you're going to be able to put your best foot forward. And I think that's the most important thing. It's a great question.
All right, and last call for any questions. All right, so thank you guys so much for attending. Thank you, Ken. That was very helpful information.